All right. Tip number 3, make the essay portray you positively. I think that's kind of a no-brainer, but I do want to dig deeper into that because there is something that is now becoming more of a trend. So we normally attend the NACAC conference every single year. So NACAC stands for the National Association for College Admissions Counselors. So this is the governing body of all college admissions officers and guidance counselors at high schools. And based on one of the more recent surveys, they actually listed some of the key factors that they look at. And based on this recent survey, one of the key items that is now rising the charts in terms of factors that colleges deem very important is this category called positive character attributes. Okay, yes, that is really vague, right? And we'll kind of like dissect what that means in a little bit. But I wanted to discuss it in terms of the essay because just below that is the essay, okay, in terms of order of importance. And I think they're very, very linked. In fact, the essay is probably the single most important place where you can demonstrate these positive character attributes. And true enough, as part of the survey, they actually rated that as the #1 place that they look at to determine whether or not you show the kind of character that they're looking for. So 86.7% of the polled say that the content of the essay or the personal statement is what they look at the most, okay? Followed then by your teacher or counselor recommendations, your extracurriculars, and then of course there's the interview, okay? So as you can see, the essay is going to be really pivotal in terms of really portraying yourself as the type of person and student that they're looking for, right? So yeah, so what does this mean? What is character, right? So based on that same survey, there was an article trying to dissect exactly that, right? How is character defined and measured? Okay, so according to Dr. Mark Drozdowski, right, he broke it down in terms of what character means, and they can sort of sort it out into these various attributes like resilience, service, curiosity, perseverance, respect, kindness, integrity, just being a good overall person, I guess. Okay, but some other factors too are compassion, gratitude, grit, growth mindset, perspective taking, purpose, and self-control. So I guess the key distinction here is that they wanted to see that you're a good ethical person, which are things like empathy and compassion, but there are also things that are tied into your achievement or your performance, showing that you're hardworking, that you're resilient, and that you're very diligent, right? So those are all, part of what it means to be the type of person they want. They want someone who is a good, upstanding citizen, very moral, very ethical, but also someone who is hardworking, diligent, shows a lot of passion for their studies. So that's really what you want to incorporate in your various essays, not just in your personal statement, but also in like the supplemental essays that they have you write. Okay, so how does this relate to the essay? Well, your personal statement is effectively your face to college admissions officers, right? So yeah, so pretty much when you are doing admissions work, and I had, the privilege of looking at grad school admissions offices or applications when I was doing grad work at Harvard, I never got to see any of the people whose applications I was reading, but the essays gave me some sort of an idea of what type of a person this applicant was. Right. And generally speaking, the essays are evaluated not just as a writing sample, right? Because it is looked at as a way to judge, like, how well do you write? How well do you articulate your thoughts and your ideas? But it's also looked at as a way to sort of almost psychoanalyze an applicant. What kind of person is he or she? Okay, what is important to them, or what do they demonstrate in this essay that lets us know that they would be a good fit for the type of community that we're trying to form? And so, having said that, that's really an important thing when you're trying to write your personal statement. You do not just want to think of any interesting or fancy story about yourself and then just start with that, especially if whatever story you're trying to tell doesn't really have a good point about the type of person you are. So I normally suggest to students that you kind of want to just reverse engineer it, right? So try to think about like certain qualities or traits that you possess that you want to highlight to the admissions office, right? So if you're really a very kind, compassionate person and you do a lot of volunteering, and this is definitely something that many people see as a trait that they think about when they think of you, then sure, go ahead and craft a narrative that tells the story of maybe something that you are very passionate about and a cause that you're trying to serve, maybe people that you would want to work with, you had worked with in the past, right? If let's say, for example, you're just very tenacious academically, right? You have this, insatiable curiosity. If that's something that defines you in terms of your activities and your relationships with other people, then of course that would make for a logical place for you to tell your story when you're writing your essay, okay? So for the Common App essay, this is widely viewed as your personal statement. It is perfectly acceptable to write in a way that's less formal, right? You don't have to have like a thesis or topic sentences. You can write it almost like a story, right? And in fact, that's kind of the convention, that's the norm for it to almost read like a biographical reflection or autobiographical reflection, or like, it'll feel like an exercise in creative writing in some cases, right? You'll use dialogue, you'll use scene setting and everything, okay? All right. Now, of course, it's also important to remember that this essay should focus on you. So even if, let's say, for example, you do want to write an essay about influences in your life, right? Your family, maybe a mentor like a teacher or a coach, it should still be more like a 60-40 balance where 60% is about you and 40% is about that person. You should still bring it back to how these people impacted you, right? And demonstrate to them how this influence was kind of shown in your life. Okay. It's also important to avoid cliche topics. Now, it's kind of hard sometimes to know whether or not the idea that you have is cliche. That's kind of why it's important to get the advice of your school counselors, maybe some of your teachers, like an English teacher would be a good sounding off board. That's why HS2 counselors are oftentimes a really good resource, because we've had experience seeing dozens, if not hundreds upon hundreds of essays. And so we can tell you whether or not an essay topic might come across as a bit cliche to admissions officers, right? Because if we're looking at certain essays and, on the typical year, we'll probably see like a couple hundred essays, the admissions people who read these things, and that's all they do, will probably read something like a couple thousand essays every single application cycle, right? And a couple of thousand of them, if they all sound the same, right, that's not good, right? So, there can be certain kind of like cliche or trope essays. Like I put a couple here that I typically hear a lot. There's the sports triumph essay. This is kind of like the whole Rocky montage thing. You got cut from your team as a freshman, but you worked hard and you trained and eventually made the team as a sophomore or junior, and you guys made it all the way to the state championships, right? That's a fairly predictable story arc. Here's another thing too. That arc does not necessarily limit itself to just sports, right? That same kind of story arc can be found in a debate essay, or let's say, or an academic essay, we're talking about your grades, right? If it's fairly predictable, that's not good, okay? If they can already kind of figure out what the ending of your essay is going to be. There are tragedy essays. While college admissions people tend to be sympathetic to, things that happen to you that are oftentimes very tragic or very, definitely very negative, you don't necessarily get into top colleges just because they feel sorry for you, right? So if you were to write on a certain kind of like tragic situation, you do want to talk about the growth process, how this event has shaped you and how you've grown from the process, rather than like relying on pathos and very emotional sort of like language in order to elicit sympathy, right? Because like I said, a top school isn't really just going to accept you just because they feel sorry for you. In fact, there have been articles and discussions about like the COVID essay, right? There's some that require a COVID essay where at some point, like admissions people suffered from what's called like COVID fatigue. They just got tired of reading a lot, even though, yes, they feel sorry for people who had lost maybe a family member during COVID. At some point, if you're hearing a lot of these essays and they all sound similar, you don't really stand out as much. Okay. There's also what I call the exotic journey essay, right? So you do a mission trip somewhere, or you talk about your experiences traveling to another country, right? So in and of itself, that's not going to get you in. But if the experience of traveling has really widened, or broadened your horizons or your understanding of other cultures, I think that's valid, but you don't necessarily want to just write about it like an exotic travel destination, okay? Because that in and of itself is not going to get the job done. Okay, you also want to try to bounce your ideas off of other people who know you well. So I'd say getting the advice from like your family and friends could be really crucial, because they've known you for many years. And in fact, in the case of your parents, they've known you your whole life, right? So they could be a vital, sounding board for you to figure out whether or not the topics that you write about in your essay ring true to them about the type of person you are, okay? And then above all else, do make sure that the essay sounds like you. Don't try to fake it and sound like someone you're not, okay? Colleges have gotten good at spotting fakes. And please, for the love of God, do not be tempted to go ahead and recycle someone else's essay or have someone write the essay for you. Colleges do use things like turnitin.com. They can even, like these days, they've even been on top of the whole chat GPT phenomenon. And they do have various ways to detect whether or not you use chat GPT to write your college essay, right? So please do make sure that this is something you've done as an original piece of work, okay?